the debrief is so critical. What went well? What are the gaps or areas to improve? And what am I going to do tomorrow?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental, a podcast all about the psychology of sport and performance. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga, and I'm here with Hugh Gilmore. And when I say I'm here, I mean I'm on the internet because we're still in the middle of a global pandemic with restrictions on meeting indoors. And to be honest, I don't really fancy doing this outside in December, do you?
Not really. I mean, Pete, technically speaking, if you're on the internet with me, you're also on the internet with our listeners because they're listening through the internet. Is that not fair to say?
Yeah, so I guess we're all here together.
Okay, so we're all here together. That's interesting.
Anyway, how's things? Anyway, Hugh, I've enjoyed Series 1, but I'm absolutely loving what we've done so far in Series 2, and I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I think the conversation with Camilla and Andrew was really useful for me, and I think the rest of the episodes have been brilliant as well. Sadly, I'd say this is maybe better than season 1. I don't know if that's true. That's up to our listeners, but yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the quality of what we're doing is, I can't say that, can I? The quality of what we're doing is just getting higher and higher. I was talking about blowing your own trumpet.
Well, no, I think you're
right.
making less mistakes.
Fewer. Normally we start with a question, but while that seemed like a pretty good gimmick for the podcast, it's actually really difficult to continually think of questions around these topics. So today we've got a competition instead of a question. The event versus the grind. There are some sports where athletes might spend a lifetime preparing for one shot, one opportunity, one competition, one event. And there are others where athletes have to push through a season, competing day in, day out for months and months on end, only to just start again the next season. That's the grind. We're going to explore those contrasts in this episode, and Hugh and I are going to decide, based on evidence, because we're scientists, obviously, which type of sport is the best and which we'd rather compete in. Now, our guest today is a very special one, not least because she has expertise and experience as both a performance consultant and psychologist and a competitor on the world stage. And I'm so thrilled to introduce Dr. Karen McNeil. Karen, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Now, Karen, you've almost 2 decades of experience and have been working with Olympians at the last 4 Olympic Winter Games, I believe. And in fact, you were the manager of sports psych services for Vancouver Olympic Committee's medical team at 2010 and the lead mental health counselor for Team Canada at 2018 Games. And I think you're going to be doing the same in 2021. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And But you competed as well, though, at international level for over a decade. And what sport was that in?
In Canada, we called it field hockey, but in the UK, you might know it as hockey.
Right, because hockey is ice hockey in Canada. Right?
And ice, yeah. Well, we don't say ice hockey here; we say hockey for ice hockey in Canada. But yeah, so field hockey for us Canadians and hockey for the rest of the world.
All right, fantastic. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled. Well, Hugh and I are both thrilled to have you on the podcast today, and I think you're going to lend a wealth of experience to this particular topic. So, Hugh, before we get started, then I'm 100% on the side of the grind. I'm all for that day in, day out, competing every week or every couple of days, grinding through a tough season. That sits with me nicely. I think I'd prefer that to working towards some sort of far off goal, where you've only got one opportunity. That's me. What about you? Where do you sit? The event or the grind?
Yeah, I think I prefer the idea of constantly playing because, trying to do something for a 4-year cycle, that seems very intense. I think my idea of sport is something that you do throughout the year, not something that you do at a part in the year. It's like it's throughout the year and for enjoyment, nearly, I suppose. I don't know. Maybe actually it's a perfect opportunity to ask our guest. Karen, what was the sport that you competed in internationally?
So it was hockey. Yeah, field hockey.
Field hockey. You've just said that, haven't you?
Were you not listening here?
No, I was reading
Did you
through the
miss that
questions.
first bit?
Sorry, Karen. I was reading through the questions, trying to get my head organized.
It's still
Right.
field hockey. It hasn't changed in the last couple of
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still field hockey. Hockey for UK,
Yeah.
field hockey for us Canadians. Yeah.
So, Karen, I suppose, I mean, which do you prefer, the event or the grind, and what are your thoughts on Pete's question?
Well, I mean, I think, this is the thing is there's the event and there's a pinnacle crescendo, but playing for a decade, it was a grind. And we played in leagues. I played over in Europe for a couple years, and so part of leading up to the event is a grind. So I think there's a combination, but there's nuances to each one. So if you're playing, let's take our professional sports, basketball or baseball, or that's a long 162 game season versus our Olympians who really are building to, for some, hopefully less than 11 seconds for an 8-year period, right? So there's nuances to different. So yeah, in terms of what I would prefer, I kind of like the perform on demand, like need one opportunity and you got to do it, but the build to that through the grind.
Mm. Well, we're going to revisit this after we've had a little bit of a discussion about some of these things, and I'm going to see if anybody changes their mind based on what we might talk about today. For our listeners, if you want to get involved in this as well, check out our Twitter at EPM Podcast and let us know what you think. Maybe you're an athlete that competes in one of these sport types, or maybe you just have an idea of the type of sport that you might want to be involved in. What do you think? The event or the grind? Which do you prefer? So you've talked about what you might prefer, Karen, and I'm going to start with the broadest possible question. You mentioned the 162 game season in Major League Baseball, and there's this idea of working for 4, maybe even 8 years towards an Olympic cycle. What's harder? What's more difficult?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and it's hard to compare because it's apples and oranges, right? I think they're different, and I think they come the context comes with different pressure. So you have, as we talked about, the event where it's an 8-year cycle, and let's add the development years of probably 10 years on top of that to get to 12 seconds and then you're done type of thing. And so in that context, the pressure is perform on demand. How good can I be in this singular moment? Where when you look at the grind, it's more around sustained performance over time. And it's really about performance consistency and bringing your best over a long period, and the sacrifices that need to be made, and the nuances of what you have to give up for that committed season, that period type of thing. So I think it's different. I think both are hard. If it was easy, we'd all been doing it, right? So I think the thing is the competitors that I know, the top performers, they don't see it as hard, but rather as a challenge. How good can I be in this moment?
Hugh, have you got any thoughts here? Because you work with Olympic athletes, right? Building towards, again, that sort of 4-year, perhaps 8-year cycle. What do you see from your perspective as a psych working in those sports?
I think it's interesting because what I've been actually thinking about is the Paralympic athletes in powerlifting and strength sports, like powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, are maybe a 20-year endeavor to get to that point. Whereas you look at somebody who does a speed sport like, what's that one where they slide down a big hill on a bacon tray? That one.
The luge?
Luge and skeleton.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
There's people who have talent transferred out of sports in that, in the UK, and within 6 months to a year, they're at international level. And I kind of think there's some physical traits you have them, and other physical traits take years to develop. And that's playing about in my head at the moment. And then the other thing I'm thinking is, we've framed this question as the event versus the grind, but like with the likes of field hockey or hockey, as Carnes mentioned, that's an Olympic sport, and there is like a 4 year cycle to that. But actually, hockey for most people is played on a weekly basis across seasons, and that's kind of slightly different. Where maybe you've got multiple competitions. So at the moment, Pete, I'm a little bit confused, but I'm intrigued because I think there's something here about the psychology of long term gains versus the enjoyment of the sport throughout the year, or long term
Mm,
desire versus that short term enjoyment.
yeah.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into some of the psychology that underpins these two, perhaps different, but as Karen's already mentioned, there's probably some overlap between these two types of sport as well. But we're going to get into the psychology underpinning it, and we're going to start by looking at the grind. Now, one of the best examples that I've heard of sports psychology in action was from the late great Ken Ravizza, and he did a lot of work in baseball. And I heard a story one time, and people have to forgive me if I mess this up, but I heard the story about him lining up in practice, lining up 162 baseballs in front of the team in preseason practice, and him asking the team to tell him, what do you notice? What do you notice about these 162 baseballs? The answer, of course, being that they're all identical. One of them is not more or less important than the other, and they all contribute equally to the big picture, right? Baseball is obviously at the extreme end of the grind. The NBA's got an 82 game season plus playoffs. The football leagues in the UK play 46 games. The Premier League, because they're special, only play 38. How do we maintain focus, motivation, consistency of effort? I think you've both mentioned already, throughout such a long period of time.
Yeah, and I love that. Always love Ken's stories. I met him early on when I was like a little grad student at Aspen. He always had the time for everyone, right? And he always has these little nuggets and these metaphors that he uses. And I
Mm,
think that's one of the points: novelty, metaphors, have something to grab onto. And I think when you're looking at the grind, kind of that whole idea of grit comes to mind. So Angela Ducksworth, that passion and perseverance towards long-term goals. And when you look at what douses grit, it's typically fear and fatigue. So when you look at what you need to do to kind of maintain that motivation, I think it comes down to probably three things. Is number one, energy management. So managing that over time, optimizing focus so that you're paying attention to what matters most. And then it would be, I don't know if you'd language it as building confidence or managing the narrative that can lead to that fear and that fatigue over time. So if we do a bit of a deeper dive into each one of those, so energy management, Jim Lord, Tony Schwartz, I don't know if you've heard of those fellows, but they've done a lot of writing on this. And
mm,
one of the things, one of the quotes they have is it's not the demand and stress, but it's the lack of intermittent recovery strategies that really kill the energy. And so when I'm working with folks who are needing to sustain for a long period of time, we really look at what are energy makers and what are the energy takers. And then it's really strategies or recovery plan around how do we boost, enhance those energy makers? How do we mitigate those energy takers? And really keeping people attached to the larger vision or the goal. Why are we doing this in the first place, right? So that would be one piece on the energy management. I think secondly, when we look at optimizing focus, it all starts with clarity of what good is. So Ken put down those 162 games. If you were performing at your best in a game, what would that look like? And then it's a matter of figuring out, those key performance factors. What do you need to do technically? What's the attitude or mindset that you're bringing? Where's that activation level at? Where is it needed? You map those out, and then it's about trying to maintain consistency over time. So if you take those, say, 5, 6 factors, can you get 8 out of 10 on all of them on a consistent basis? And so it's really directing your focus towards process, right? It's identifying what do I need to do to be good. And I think over a long period of time, it's that monitoring in a way that is not arduous, right? It's got to be pretty easy. And it's reinforcing what some of those things are. I think in that, the debrief is so critical because we'll have what's called time pollution. So we're done the game, But then
Mm.
I'm home and I'm with my family and I'm doing whatever, but I'm still thinking about it because I made that one play and I'm stuck on it. And so I'm not with my family. And so by debriefing each, simple as, what went well, what are the gaps or areas to improve, and what am I going to do tomorrow? Right. So I think having a process for that. So that would be that optimizing focus. And then lastly, managing the narrative and the story we tell ourselves, because I think you've heard about slumps in seasons, and I think that's,
Mm.
when I work with athletes who are in big seasons, that's a big thing that they're trying to manage over time. And really, it comes from the narrative and the story they're telling themselves, which is bleeding their confidence. Have you guys ever heard of James Gill, Dr. James Gill? He's a
No.
phenomenal human. You got to look him up. And it was a colleague who told me about him. But basically, he's a renowned eye surgeon. But in his spare time, he ran 6 double Ironmans. And so, you know what an Ironman, like, it's
Mhm. Yeah.
long. And he did that back to back. And so one of the quotes that came out from him is, you need to talk to yourself instead of listen to yourself. And so the whole idea there is to have the mindset, to have the productive narrative, the messaging that you need to have when fear and doubt set in, when you're feeling fatigued. So it's a bit of preparation within that as well. So I think over time, long-winded answer, if we break it down, energy management,
Mhm.
optimizing focus, and kind of managing, maintaining confidence in that narrative over time.
I think that's fascinating. I love what you were saying about debriefing there in terms of the focus as well. Because again, from my own experience of playing basketball, I know exactly what you mean. That kind of, you get to the end of the game and you're thinking, right, I should have done this, I could have done that, and you can almost going over and over it in your mind until the next game. And that's one of the reasons why I think I was on the side of that grind, because I get another opportunity in a few days' time. I get to come back and play again. Whereas if that happens at the event, you don't have the same opportunity. It's that kind of one shot, one chance. But I love what you were saying there about having that debrief so that you can park that, so that you can again maintain that focus on what's important at the right time.
That's right. And it's a 1-2 minute process, but so important. It could be longer if needed, but yeah, just make sure that's in. Yeah.
Yeah. Hugh, any thoughts at this point?
Yeah, that was probably the most detailed answer we've heard on the show. That was brilliant. But seriously, though, the final quote that you finished up with of "Don't listen to yourself, talk to yourself," that that was very powerful, because I kind of think, like, in myself, I'm always going like, "How am I feeling? Am I feeling okay to have the energy to do this? Nah, I'll can that awful. I'll not go out and train. I'll not, I'll because I'm finished up playing sport. I don't need to worry about it as much." But then it's kind of like, if you're talking to yourself, then you're leading yourself. You're stuck to your plan. There's a long-term identity in there that you're thinking about, and I just think that really landed quite powerfully with me. But at the same time, you've mentioned a number of things there, in terms of the debrief and just everything around that. And yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed. I'm curious though, like, if if you were to split yourself into a long term or short term identity, because we need both. We can't have. We sometimes do need to listen to yourself when the pressure's too much or things are maybe becoming overwhelming. Have you any advice on that in terms of making the judgment? Because it is about, you know at a certain point it tips and you maybe do need to listen to yourself. Have you any thoughts there?
Yeah, great question. And I think the thing is we've got to look at, we have what, 80,000 thoughts a day. And for those who struggle a bit more, 60,000 of them are negative and critical. And so I think that's the distinction is we have this inner voice that helps us to regulate and helps us to assess situations and helps us to look at danger and when we should stop things. So important to I think hear the message. I think what I find with my athletes, where they get into trouble is when there's that, we call it the critic. When the critic is on, and it's calling them names and it's putting them down and it's saying they can't. Which, the question I ask is, whose voice is that? And often they come up, it's a parent, it's a coach, it's a teacher, it's a bad experience, it's a, that's formulated into this belief system. And so what we need to do is tease apart fact from thought, right? Just because I
Mhm.
think it doesn't mean it's true. And so I think when we're thinking about productive mindset, what we're saying is, okay, what is the belief that I need to ground myself in to endure this situation or to execute in this situation? And typically it's something like, I got this, you've done the work, you can do this. But you're gonna have, like imagine two lawyers, and there's an axe murderer, and he killed him. No, he didn't. Yes, he did. As soon as evidence comes up, the other guy shuts up, right? And so it's the same thing with these beliefs: is you can't do it. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Well, you look at the evidence. Well, I've trained for 10,000 hours. I've competed before and executed every single time. And oh, okay, no, I got this, right? So it's that kind of idea. So back to your question, Hugh, um, we need to be aware of the data, the information, but we also have to hold on in terms of what's best for safety and performance, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm definitely stealing that lawyer analogy. That is in my back pocket, and we'll be deploying it at work.
It's because what you kind of just described there was like almost classic CBT, wasn't it? These are the thoughts that I'm having. Let's look at the evidence underpinning them. Let's do a kind of little bit of a cross examination here, and let's see, well, do I still believe in that original thought? The other thing that you mentioned, coming from a completely different perspective, was this idea that all of those voices that you hear are kind of familiar voices. You ask the question, whose voice is that? And they are normally people who are familiar to us: parents, friends, colleagues, coaches. And I like to, I come from an ACT perspective, and we talk about those people as the passengers on the bus.
Yeah.
We won't go into that here, but if I Google passengers on the bus metaphor and watch some of the videos, because I think it's an absolutely fantastic metaphor for some of those voices. And we need to understand that they are just passengers on the bus, but who's driving the bus? Well, I am. And I can take it in whatever direction I want, regardless of what those people are saying. I've completely forgotten what my actual point was, but there was a really a nice metaphor that you were using there.
Well, maybe I could bounce off that a little bit if you're okay. I'll just jump in, and I
Mm-hmm.
definitely am ACT perspective as well. And so I think the thing with these thoughts is it's I think if we try and get into the dance of refuting and challenging versus I'm getting hooked into
Mm-hmm.
these, and these are not serving me. And so that's where it goes back to that clarity. Who am I? And if we look at ACT, they talk about in values, right? So how do I want to behave as a human? How do I want to show up at my best? So I think with the thoughts and the feelings and all those things that are emerging, we like self-awareness is part of my model, one of the foundational pieces of it. And so it's being aware of what that narrative is, and looking at what purpose is it serving, but also I think grounding ourselves in like that inner coach. And I think that's back to that point of we need to talk to yourself versus listen to yourself. It's we need an inner coach to just reinforce along the way as well. So I think a lot of these theories can blend together, but we can kind of pick the pieces we like, can't we?
So, energy management, this idea about focus and managing the narrative for those long grind type sports, I can see how some of that would be useful in the event type sports as well. Now, at the Olympic Games, you're preparing for 4, 8, sometimes 12 years. As Hugh mentioned early on, in some of the Paralympic powerlifting sports, it can be a 20-year, pathway to the pinnacle of performance. There's such a narrow margin in some of these sports between gold medal and like 10th place. You mentioned yourself that some of these sports, the performance is over after like 10 seconds. What separates the best from the rest in the context of something like that, something like the Olympic Games, where the events are so quick, yet you've been
Yeah.
working towards them for so long?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I just feel so fortunate to have a 20-year learning lab in this, right? Like my first Olympics was 2002 as a young rookie, and we can talk about what not to do with that. But I think just learning over the years that there's a few things, and I don't know if do you guys know Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld? Is he
Yeah.
popular in the UK? Okay, so he had this skit where it's like you train your whole life, and then he's talking about the 100 dash, and it's like first, second, third, never heard of you, like it's kind of like, and you're all within like millimeters of each other crossing that line, right? And so I think it really is what separates, what is that narrow margin. And sure, we can go back to kind of the performance models we all know, where it's a multitude of factors. Mike Gervais talks about, you can train your craft, you can train your body, you can train your mind. I think equipment is in there, but really when we ask our performers what made the difference or what let you down, they will often say their mind, right? Because the difference is, I mean, everyone's pretty technically sound. The physical part, like there's nuances within that equipment can manage, but I think that's a piece of it. And so when we do a deeper dive into that mental fitness and resilience, I think it's really, first of all, around the individuals who are able to execute in the moment. Like at the last games, I had probably four individual who medaled, and when I look at the common characteristics of those individuals, extremely high clarity on who they were at their best. What did they need to do to be their best in this moment, in this context? And so I heard, who was it? Sean McCain said, and he's been to 12 different Olympic Games. And what he said is, we don't have any certainty of the outcome, but you do know the behaviors you need to reproduce in that moment. And so with that, it's clarity of what are those behaviors, what are those things we need, and then it's a matter of establishing percentages. So you're tracking that over time as you train. So you look at those factors. It's like, yep, I was able to execute at an 8 out of 10 on that, and then that helps to produce this reliability. So going into the event, you have more kind of confidence on that. I think the other piece, as we've talked about, is that self-awareness, being such an expert on yourself. How do I respond to stress and pressure? What am I going to notice in myself when games comes? Oh, okay, I'm probably going to do this. I'm probably going to hyper focus on my mistakes. I'm probably going to, so then just let it be. Like that's just part of you, but then bringing that focus back to what you need. I think then of course there's the mental fitness skills and the resilience tools. I almost see it like your mental fitness golf bag. So if we're going around the course, you're not going to use a putter for every shot, not going to be effective. So you need your calm club, your focus club, your confidence club, right? So you have this arsenal of tools that you can use depending on what the internal environment is giving you. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, one thing that I've really noticed, especially at this last games, was adapting or understanding the context. So those who perform and I'm able to execute, let's say it's ski racing, I'm able to execute on this hill. Well, then they get to the games and it's a completely different emotional climate and external climate. So what's needed? And so I had an athlete who, had a couple of games prior to it, and going into that context, we really explored it. We painted the picture, we created the sense, and there was high emotion going on for this individual in my office. And I'm like, that's what you're going to experience times 10 at the games. And how are you going to imagine, or how are you going to manage when that comes up? And individual end up winning a medal and whatnot. But I think it's painting the picture and knowing that contextually it's not going to be normal. And you just got to sign up for it and have that little whisper of, I can adapt or adjust to whatever comes my way. So that was another long-winded answer. Sorry, I think I have my process and my model, and anyway, but yeah, bottom line, have complete clarity who you are at your best, get your percentages, make sure you're tracking that so you can produce that reliability, the mental fitness skills and tools, and the context, like really understanding that context and how you need to adapt.
I think it's really interesting there because, the tendency, or what you hear a lot of sometimes, is the idea that, right, it's just like any other game. We're going to treat it like any other game, or we're going to treat it like any other situation. What you've described there is saying, well, actually, no, it's not. And there's no use pretending that it's going to be, because if you do that, when you get there and you discover that actually it's not, actually, the stress and the pressure is, multiplied tenfold. If you've prepared for this like any other game, you're going to come unstuck. You need to prepare for it being special and being different, and accept that it's going to be.
One really good example, as a rookie performance psychologist, sports psych, whatever you want to call us, mental performance consultant. So 2002, we're getting the speed skating team ready for Salt Lake City Games, and need the perfect ice and need the perfect environment, and we need to take care of everything for them. Well, you get to the games like 6 months after 9/11, it was not the perfect environment. And so that was a major fail. Where going forward, it was here are the fire drills. Okay, so let's hide the skates. So the individual doesn't have it and only gets his skates like, 10 minutes before. How did he respond then? And
Hmm.
so it is how we prepare these individuals, the helping them to adjust and adapt to a variety of contexts is so critical. Yeah.
Hugh, have you ever done that? Have you ever hidden your athletes' equipment to prepare them for the Olympics?
No, I haven't done anything quite as drastic as that. I'm aware things like that have been done in other sports, though. I mean, within, I suppose, pressure training and Olympic weightlifting, I did put plastic bin bags over the weights so that athletes didn't know what weight they had to lift in the training. And this was kind of funny because I told it to an able-bodied powerlifter who was like a world champion, and he started doing it on Instagram. And next thing you know, the whole powerlifting community just memed him. So apologies, Bryce. You've took really good psychology advice and got picked on by the rest of the internet.
You mentioned about what not to do earlier on as perhaps a young psych, and I think a lot of our listeners would actually be quite interested in that. What are some of the mistakes maybe that you would make in preparing athletes for something like this? What are some of those things not to do?
I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned is do your work. Do your own work. And I think, we focus so much on the teams and the athletes, but I have to be completely prepared to be at my best at games. Games is like working in games, it's intense. It's awesome, but there's so much going on. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a wee bit of energy. And so, like being in an Olympic environment is like having like an IV of Red Bull coursing through my veins, and I just get switched on. And that was one of the mistakes in my early games is I'm coming off of retiring from being from a career in sport where we didn't achieve my ultimate dream of going to the games to going to my first games. And so it was this, but I didn't do the work. I wasn't
Mm.
aware of how I may respond. I wasn't aware of how I needed to be. Fast forward to the 2018 games, where I started a physical fitness regime probably a year out to make sure I was fit. I had my nutrition plan. I did a mindfulness course just to do a little bit of another dose in my own regulation. And I created my performance plan of who I was at my best. And so I was able to execute in that and regulate during. So I don't know if it's too much about. I mean, I think learning as you go through, there'll be different nuances, and you'll let go of the preparation. Like I had my worksheet for in 2002. Here's a worksheet for you to do versus just be with the person and interact and give them what they need in that moment versus having everything planned, right? So I think the biggest advice: do your work. Know who you are at your best and what needs to happen, and then I think it's part of that art form and just learning the process of consulting in a games context because it's very nuanced versus just being outside of that environment.
That's exceptionally insightful. The idea that the sports psych is the performer. I think there's even papers written on that and about how you need to be in the top of your game, and especially in that environment where there's so much to be reactive to, and they can set you maybe a bit off course as well. I suppose I'm interested though. There's also the coach at play here. At the Olympics, what is it that a coach would need to do, or what could they say to manage that high energy environment, and how would they be best on their game? So, would you give the same advice to a coach, or how would it differ there? And then similarly, like, what would a coach need to do in an environment in a more grinding sport, like say basketball, like say basketball or baseball?
Yeah, so great question, and the coach is pretty instrumental, pretty key in these environments, and so I would give the same advice, and we do this with coaches, and I think traditionally, we focus on the team and the athlete, and we often leave out the poor coach or the high performance director. They're just as important, and they can make or break, the psyche of an athlete in the moment if they're not on. So absolutely, get the coach to do the work, know who they are, their best, all those kind of things. I think in the event the coach, I would say, part of it is what creates stress and anxiety can be when things are uncertain, unfamiliar, and thrown off. So I think the coach really provides that grounding, that familiarity. So what they do is pretty consistent. What they say is pretty consistent, and so it's almost offering that grounding to the individual. I think often too, there can be distractions and there can be so much going on. So, really reinforcing that clarity of purpose and focus. This is what we need to do. For you to execute, this is what needs to happen, right? Or pulling that from the athlete, being that sounding board, saying, "Okay, tell me about what your plan is for this," and just tweaking that. I think the other thing that the coach can do, because we're going to have doubts and fears. Athletes will have doubts and fears. That's normal. That's a protective mechanism, right? And so that little reinforcement, providing that evidence, right? That little whisper of yes, you can, and not just you got this, go for it, slugger. But it's like, do you remember when? We grinded through all that training. Do you remember when we played that intense game when you were completely fatigued? Do you remember when? And so I think offering that reinforcing and that complete that messaging that I believe in you, go for it, right? So I think at the event, coach can play a variety of roles, and those are just a few that I'm thinking off the top of my head.
I think that's a really good point. Like, actually, you can prepare as a coach to boost an athlete's confidence by having a list of facts, prior to the event. So if you get stuck, you go like, "Here's the facts, bang, 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 bang." They don't can't dispute that. That's only going to increase their confidence. I like that, but I'd imagine it also would work for the grind as well. But I'm keen to hear what you say. Please continue.
Yeah, so the grind, I mean, it's similar, and once again, for both you'll use similar tactics, just depending on, but once again, the context is different. And so I had the opportunity to do a bit of work for Compete to Create. So I don't know if you ever heard of Pete Carroll, Mike Gervais. Yeah, they developed a company, and so part of the training for that was to go observe the Seahawks. So Pete Carroll, have you guys heard of Pete
Mhm.
Carroll?
Yeah, yeah.
Football coach, amazing at developing culture, amazing at just high performance over consistency. And anyway, there's a few things I think for the grind. Is one number one is really bringing it back to, why are we here? What's the point? What do we all believe in? The common purpose. What are we trying to do? Right. And so I think, what does that look like for each individual, but what are we trying to do as a collective team? Right. And then I think, and this is a Pete Carrollism, but it's dripping it in. Right. So it's like, what are the messages? What are the things we need to reinforce on a consistent basis? So, if it's about, we need to execute on this play. So it's a matter of, that's what comes out in the video, or this is how we're successful. That's what comes out in the video, or it's, we're constantly dripping in those messages to reinforce those things. And then I think, it's also about the environment, and how do we create novelty? How do we switch it up just a little bit so that I keep them on their toes? What is it with gambling? Intermittent reinforcement, right? And that keeps us sustained for a long time and creates those addictions. Well, what can we do that keeps the environment and keeps the people on their toes? And then I heard this from a coach, Tommy Wheeldon. So he's a football coach, soccer for us, but football for you, in Calgary, but comes from the UK. Anyway, and they had to go compete in the bubble. right? In one of the bubble games, and how are we going to keep these guys going for 8 weeks in this bubble? They can't leave, same environment. And he talked about sugar lumps because they're the cavalry, right? Horses. But what are the little sugar lumps that we can get them to give them these little boosts? So maybe it's ordering pizza, or maybe it's we have a Netflix night, or maybe it's whatever kind of reinforcer to change things up and just create some positive energy and vibes. Maybe it's games night or whatever that is, right? So I think it is a few things, is really keeping them clear on the common purpose, the consistency, and the process and the structure, the reinforcement, and then creating that novelty and those sugar lumps, if you like.
Karn, I love that. And I think what I'm taking out from that is actually for an Olympic sports psych or an Olympic coach, they're concerned about the next 30 seconds, but actually the coach in the grind sport, where it's a long-term thing, has to actually consider the culture and context and the climate they're creating over the next year. And it's kind of like they're nearly trying to create a Mexican wave. You know that feeling when you're part of a really good team or part of something special, and it's like the energy of a Mexican wave you get in a stadium where it slowly builds and then it's amazing. That's kind of what the grind is all about, I think. Whereas when it comes to the event approach, it's much more like this idea that, everything is focused there, deliver it and perform, and nothing after matters. Whereas with this grind aspect, it's much more dynamical and there's consequences to be thought of. So I found that interesting. Pete, what did you take from that?
I really like the idea of changing it up, because part of what I was thinking around this question was, 82 games in a season, right? As a coach, what do you say, just before game 57 that's different, or that keeps it fresh? Or, how do what do you say that's different to what you said in game 55 or game 53 or game 41? But I love that idea of just kind of keeping it fresh and dropping in these little nuggets and changing it up and being able to do that. And I think finding ways of doing that's the real trick, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where that's what Pete said, is like, you've got to figure out how to say the same thing over and over in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's the trick, right? And one thing I'll just come back to, Hugh, is like, and I think we're kind of saying either or. I wouldn't say that. I think it's an and. One of the when we look at the difference makers going into the event, like an Olympic Games, it's the individual resilience, it's around the planning, and it's team effectiveness or team culture. And so going into the games, as with Ski Cross Canada, the 2018 games, we had a gold medal, a silver medal on the women's side, and a gold medal on the bronze, and a fourth place. And when we really look at one of the difference makers, it was that culture that we created. And what that did, it has almost created a little bit of a buffer from the stress of the environment, right? Because we kind of had this culture, and people felt comfortable and they could trust it, and then we could just do our thing. So I think I agree with you. It's this build with the over time, with the grind. At the same time, I think at the event, so much, like, we do so much work on creating that culture and that environment, and trying to create familiarity of the event. Like this is what you need to do to execute outside of the games. You need to do the same bloody things inside. It's just the context is different, right? So have you guys ever seen the movie Hoosiers?
Yeah.
Gene Hackman. You're a bit of, and so remember when the scene, so there's this scene, to our listeners, where they go through, and it's this small town based on a true story, and then they go to this major event, and they're in this huge stadium, and the coach takes out a measuring tape, and he measures from the back line to the free throw line, and from the from the floor to the net. It's the same court, just in a different context, right? So I think there's that piece as well.
Hugh and I are here with Dr. Karen McNeil discussing the event versus the grind, and the differences and similarities in the psychology behind those two different types of sport. So far, Hugh, I'm I'm still on the side of the grind. Like I said earlier, I think it just sits with me more. I think I'm more suited to that type of sport than the event. What about you? Have you changed your mind yet? What's your thinking?
Yeah, Peter, I think I'm much more about the grind. I'd rather, struggle every day and try and do my best every day as opposed to delay gratification for some long thing. I'd like to enjoy what I do and grind through a sport, I think. Karen, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, the thing is I think the event I think you get the best of both worlds because you get the event and the grind because there's World Cups and there's World Championships and like it's not just like we're going to this one thing. However, it is the pinnacle. It is the prize. It is the thing like I'm an Olympic gold medalist is different than I won a World Cup, right? And so it's the
Mm.
meaning we put into it that makes it different. However, as for the event, I get to do the grind and I get the event, so I get both. So I'm on that side for sure.
Well, dear listeners, we would love your thoughts on this too. So you can tweet us at EPM Podcast and let us know what you think. Maybe you're an athlete who competes in one of these sports. Maybe you're a psych who works in one of these areas. Tweet us your comments or get in touch via the website, www.80percentmental.com. So, Karen, it's one thing when you're grinding towards a championship, all right, or you're on a championship run. What about when you're playing for a crappy team? What about when you're the Sacramento Kings and you're grinding through losses? You mentioned managing the narrative earlier. Tell me a bit about that. Is it different?
Yeah, and I can speak from experience because I was on one of those crappy teams for a bit of a time, and when I was playing the junior national team with field hockey, and it's just a different level from how we prepare in Canada. It's not very popular versus all the different teams around the world. Like we're just at a different level. So we go to this tournament, but we were there preparing 2 months long, and we're just getting our butts handed to us really. And so the coach comes in and she says, okay, we're not going to have a goal to win, we're going to have a goal to be able to pass 3 times, and we're like, no, like we have to go to win. That's not realistic, right? So I think you're a competitor for a reason, and you don't want to go into the like you suck, let's try and figure out what are some challenges, these small wins that will make you feel better. And
Uh-huh.
so I think the thing with that is really it comes down to um, what has personal meaning to you, right? And so if you're on one of these teams and maybe like let's take the Premier League or one of those different level, and you may be at the bottom of the table, and so what is it about for you? What is it about for this team? So I think it comes back to the coach to be really um, a visionary and saying, hey guys, like, yes, we want to improve. And yes, we're not going to get to the top of the table, but this is what we're about. This is the brand of our team, and this is what we want to be known for. So
Mhm.
every time we go out, this is what we're trying to do. And then bring it back to the individual level. And so, okay, you're losing, but people are driven for meaning, for purpose, for growth, like what can I do to get better in this game, or what's the contribution I can make? And if I make that contribution, what impact will that have on my team or that kid sitting in the stand that just loves us, right? So I think it's connecting to a larger meaning outside of the result, right? But understand being an athlete in that it's fun sometimes, but it's great at the other times because the journey. I'm in Spain right now losing these games. Like that was great, right? So, yeah.
It's funny because we did an episode on sports parents recently,
Mm,
and one of the things that came out from that episode was exactly what you've just been talking about: was finding the meaning in something other than the sport. So
yeah,
using those experiences of playing sport to think about, okay, well, what else am I doing here? I'm traveling, I'm seeing the world, I'm connecting, I'm developing other skills. So just kind of
totally.
make that connection there.
The gratitude piece, right? Like that's so huge.
Yeah, I find it interesting, we talk about finding meaning in sport whenever we're on losing teams, but then whenever we're dealing with athletes who are winning, we're talking about finding meaning outside of sport because they find too much meaning in sport. It's like no matter where you go, you have to try and find meaning in somewhere you don't have it already. It's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
But on that note, Karen, I'm interested. Like some people as a sports psych, or even myself as a coach, and I'm sure Pete, you've experienced it, especially in team sports, you might have somebody who's got what would say like natural talent. They might be physically gifted or physically shaped appropriately for their sport, and they might be absolutely horrible trainers. They might not put a lot of effort in when they train and that type of a thing, and that can even lead to poor team dynamics in a team sport. I'm just interested. What is your take on this? Like these people who maybe they might be ego driven because they only like to compete and not train, or somebody who prefers to compete but not train. What would you do as a psych, or how would you help them? Or if you didn't have access to them, how would you tell their coach to work with them?
Yeah, great question. And I actually had an individual in one of the Olympic cycles exactly like this, and it was challenging for the coach, and we just had to figure out different ways. And so I think the first thing is, people who don't or aren't engaged in the training. I think we have to be careful of the assumptions we make around that. So is it lazy? Is it they don't like it? Is it that they're ego driven? Or is it maybe an attention issue? Is it maybe around some core wounds around and it's very external or extrinsically motivated, right? So I think we have to look at that. And so I think when we look at the ones that are up for the big game, once again, I think going back to it is you have to look at what are the motivational sources. So we all know about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic being around growth, development, something that's more personal, and it is more sustainable. The extrinsic is around the awards, is around the validation, is what we get externally. And for this athlete in particular, very solely externally driven and leading to be one of the best in the world. And so what created meaning was validation and reinforcement, which came from some earlier stuff in his childhood, right? And so that's the thing. The assumption is it's just a core wound playing out in this environment kind of thing. And so what we needed to do is not work against the grain, work with the grain. Okay, we need external, you're externally motivated, so let's do a training session and then let's stream it out. And let's see how many tweets and likes you get. So you can be creative with what the individual needs. So I think it's really looking at the sources of motivation, what really switches that individual on, why are they doing this, where do they get their energy from, and then creating the context or the environment around them to reinforce some of those things.
That's brilliant. I really like that idea of streaming out a training session to motivate somebody who's extrinsically motivated. It's very sneaky, but brilliant, and that's the sort of brilliance I like. Pete, talk to me.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of the Last Dance documentary, which we've mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, but specifically the episode around Dennis Rodman and how to deal with him. And what you just said there, Karen, was essentially kind of meeting the individual where they are and allowing them a certain amount of rope. You're allowing them to be themselves essentially, and framing your training and the way that you approach things around the player rather than trying to fit them into a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, and I think we have this, like I think in each sport culture is going to have a perception of what an athlete is. And I
mm,
think what we need to do is we need to look at the person and look at how they're wired and how they're made, or what makes them up, and kind of say, well, who are you at your best, and what do you need in order for that to happen, and put bumpers on that, because we can't just have a bunch of rogues and individuals that won't work for team culture. Put some rules, and hey, you can do you, but do it amongst these bumpers. But then how do we celebrate, elevate this person and give him that rope and that bandwidth? Like Rodman, I watched Last Dance exactly, right?
mm.
To kind of play to his strengths, play to that individual's strengths.
Okay, Karen. I've got a bit of a strange confession to make. I started trying to skateboard at 33 because I was going through a midlife crisis, and my ankles got progressively worse with the multiple injuries. But the thing is that I quite enjoyed it because there was nobody judging me. I wasn't good, I wasn't bad. I was just playing on a skateboard. And what about people who don't like to compete? Sports that are more playful in approach, such as parkour, or skateboarding, or surfing. Is there something important going on there in terms of psychology about how people can continually endeavor to self improve, but there's no event and there's no grind. They're just always playing. This doesn't fit into what we're talking about today. So I'm just going to shoehorn it right in the middle, Pete. Sorry about that. What are your thoughts, Karen?
I would suggest it does exactly talk like kind of fit in what we're talking about, because I think with these individuals, and I've been around the surfing culture, I've been around snowboarding. I worked with Team Canada snowboarding right when it kind of got into Olympic stream versus just being the pro and being this freestyle type thing, right? And I think where it meets what we're talking about is these individuals, they like to play, but if I throw it back at you, Hugh, were you just doing it to have fun, or did you want to see if you could do that trick, or if you could do that, like, I don't know, skateboard language, wheelie, whatever it's called, you know what I mean? So I think it's this whole idea of challenge and kind of the self-actualization of, I want to get better. In addition to, I'd say with those sports, is there's a belonging, there's a culture, there's a vibe that they want to stay loyal to, right? So in the surf culture, to be all aggro and competitive, for some it may work, but for others that's not really the vibe, right? And so people are attracted to these kind of cultures or these populations for a certain reason. So I think with that is, with it, it's partly the belonging, it's partly this whole, I want to challenge myself to get better at this because that's fun for me, right? But what are our Olympians doing? What are our, basketball players doing, right? Like it's slightly different, but it's really about that. How good can I be at this thing?
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. It's actually me challenging myself, more so than being challenged by the sport. The motivation is just solely intrinsic. That's a fair pushback. Thanks very much for shaping my opinions in that. Pete, have you ever fallen off a skateboard?
I have, yeah, numerous times. When I was a child, I cracked my front tooth because I flew off a skateboard when I was younger. I also went straight over the handlebars on my bike when I rode it into a tree stump when I was about 13 as well. So, yeah, fair share of injuries from doing stupid stuff. I had no idea that you'd taken up skateboarding though, so that's something that I've learned today. Knowing what you, knowing what you know now, Karen, if you could start again, because obviously you had a long career as an athlete, if you could start again and choose absolutely anything, what sport would you choose to excel in, and why?
Ooh, individual for sure. And so much comes from a team sport, but you're dependent on the team in order to get anywhere. So yeah, individual sport, and I think, you know what? Probably mountain biking, for the reasons of the challenge of it. It's outside. It's a summer sport, so you're not freezing. I've stood on more freezing cold ski hills than I would like as a consultant. And you get to travel and you get to see, the world with that. So part of it's that, and it's this individual where you can compete throughout the year at all the different World Cups, but you can also challenge yourself to perform on demand at games. Yeah, mountain biking, and I love mountain biking too.
So that's that very mix that we've been talking about throughout this, isn't it? Is that grind, yet with the events that you can excel at, that you can peak at, that you can work towards. And I think as we're going through this episode, we're starting to see that actually they're more, although some of the there are some differences, that they're more kind of one and the same almost, maybe not as separate as we perhaps first thought. Hugh, what about you? I mean, obviously you took up skateboarding in your mid-30s, but if you could start again, if you could choose a sport to excel at, what would it be? And again, why would it be? Would it be an eventy or a grindy type sport, or a combination of both?
That's a really interesting question. And I think I really enjoyed playing hurling. And that's a parochial sport based in the community that you're from in Ireland. And I think I wouldn't change that at all. I think it was brilliant. And I'd still like to be involved. Only I'm living in England now, so I can't. But I don't know. I was drawn to skateboarding and surfing because like they seemed exotic. and fun and adventurous, and that's why I started doing that whenever I'm in my 30s. But yeah, I think maybe those, but I still think they wouldn't have a patch on Gaelic sports like hurling. Pete, what about you though? I mean, what would you choose? I mean, basketball's like it's not really much of a sport. I don't rate basketball. There's
Easy
only like
enough.
five players, and there's only five players in the team. Like it's hardly even. You should have more
How
mates
many
than
do you
five
want?
players. What? Yeah. But no, seriously, Pete, basketball really is there not something better for you that you should have done?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like Karen said, there's a lot to be said for the the team sport environment, and I certainly got a lot from that. I think again, I like the grind of playing over and over again over the course of a season because of that. You get the if you play really well, you get to carry on that momentum straight away. And if you play really badly, there's an opportunity to put that right straight away. Whereas if you're working towards something that's like a long an event like the Olympics, that chance to either keep it going or put it right doesn't come for a long time. And I think I would find that quite hard. In terms of sports that I would love to, I don't know, if put something into or to excel at. I think for me, it's the type of sports where you finish knowing that you've just given absolutely everything. So
Mhm.
I watch things like cycling and the road race in the Olympics, for example. And you see, you've crossed the finish line, and these athletes have nothing, absolutely nothing left. And I think that's the type of sport that I would love to uh, to excel in. I don't know whether I've got the
Mm.
temperament for it, but it's certainly something that I would, see myself doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems desirable anyway. I'm going to flip this on its head again. Sorry, Pete, I'm hijacking the event versus the grind. But what about in terms of Karn? You know, your knowledge of this idea of the event versus the grind. How would we apply things from that area or those ways of thinking into health interventions? So, such as like people who don't like watching the training or the diet, um, but they like the fact that they might not have the event or the anti-event of having a heart attack. Like I'm nearly as old as Pete now. Well, I'm always going to be a few years behind you, but
You've
I
just
need to look
thrown
after my.
bombs. You've
I need to look after my
daggers
health. You know what?
everywhere in this episode.
I need to look after my health. And what advice would you have about breaking down a health intervention into the event versus the grind of a health intervention from psychology?
Yeah, and really it's this whole idea, and I've presented at conferences on the whole idea of high performance living, right? And so how do we take these principles, but how do we maintain it? Because we all want to be healthy. We all want to watch our weight and do all those things. So it's not out of motivation, but it can be a grind, and it takes a lot of discipline. Right. And so in order to sustain that, I think over time there's a few things. And number one, it's the same kind of principles. What does good look like? So if I have high performance living, or if I'm managing my health in the way that is aligned with how I want, what are those things that I'm doing, and what are those indicators? So I'm a certain weight, or my blood pressure's at a certain place, or whatever that may be. And then I think, once again, the meaning in it. So why? Like, why not sit on the couch and eat a bag of Doritos consistently, and drink my beer? Well, is it because I want my pants to fit? And that could be. But if there's a deeper meaning of, like, I have a 7-year old, and I've got to run after her, and I'm a bit of an older mom, and so I got to sustain my health over time. And if I'm doing it because I want to be an active and engaged mom, that gives way more discipline to my actions than me just wanting my pants to fit a bit better. So that would be one thing. I think the other thing is, there's a lot of there can be a lot of cognitive load going on too, thinking about, should I do this or not? Should I do that or not? So I think creating those habits, creating a bit of a system that's easy to implement, and then creating habits. So for example, I had a CEO I'm working with, super busy, needed to take care of the health, and we just went through the recovery pillars, like moving, um, eating, and connecting. And so we did that on his way into work. So he'd park 20 minutes away. He'd walk in walk out. There's 40-minute brisk walk. He'd listen to a podcast on something. That's the kind of getting the mind thing. And then he'd, have himself sorted with some healthy snacks. So that took no extra effort other than a little bit of pre-planning, right? So I think incorporating and making habits out of it. And then lastly, the system of accountability. So having me or have it like if I have a friend I'm meeting for a run, I'm not gonna bail on that. If I'm just saying, hey, I want to go for a run, I may bail on that, right? So it's having that system of accountability, whether it's people or whether it's I have to report into a person and say, hey, what am I doing? Those kind of things. So those are a few things we can maybe borrow, and people can think about.
Yeah, I like the idea of goals versus values, which I think you mentioned earlier, and we talked a little bit about that in our goal setting episode that we did a while back in series 1. The difference between motivation and commitment, and that actually commitment that's values based can be a much more powerful driver than that goals based motivation. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think the big question of what would this mean to you if you achieved it is that opens up so much when you're talking to somebody. Just what would this mean to you if you achieved it, and you're getting an answer of what's going to get them out of bed, what's going to stop them bailing on it. So yeah, great points. Right, Karen, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. You have achieved an impressive amount in sports psych, and myself and Pete were a little bit awestruck that we're having you on the podcast all the way we're from Canada. So I'm going to dig into some of your experiences here, and I'm going to start off with a question about for our listeners who are trainee sports psychs. I want your top tips for, and in under 60 seconds, not a big answer, in under 60 seconds, what is the gold nuggets of that you would give to trainee sports psychs who are preparing athletes or teams for the event and then for the grind? So within 60 seconds, what nuggets does a sports psych need to remember for both of those?
For the sports psych trainee, do your own work. Know who you are at your best, and because I think, yeah, so do your own work would be one thing. For the event, understanding the Olympic context is different than any other. So try and either be prepared for that, or yeah, just make sure you're incorporating that. For the grind, for a trainee, don't overdo it. Drip it in. It's little tiny little bits of things. If you try and over function during the grind, people will shut you down and you will no longer be effective over the long term.
That is a mic drop there. I think that's something I actually need to do better myself. That's class. Drip it in. Your interventions are dripped in over the year. I like it. So it doesn't hinge in one big thing. Okay, right. Let's move swiftly on then. In 60 seconds again, top tips for getting better as an athlete at the event and then at the grind.
Event, clarity of what good looks like. What are the behaviors I need to reproduce to be at my best? And then track that to get the reliability that you can reproduce it. Adapt to the current context. Notice what's going on in the moment, and just use your tools to adapt, and then kind of the laser focus on what I need to do to be my best, and just let how you feel be. So it's accepting you're not going to feel normal, um, and knowing what you need to do to be your best. Okay, that's not 60 seconds, but here we go. Grind. I can't. I get too
nothing
passionate about this.
happens. Nothing happens.
I know, but it's a goal. It's a challenge. He's like, he gave me the challenge, and I can't because I just get too passionate. And anyway, okay, all good. Okay, the grind, 60 seconds or less. I guess it was the whole question. Same thing. What good looks like. Set an intention daily. So it's instead of just going for this long create bumpers. So this week, this is what my main challenge is for me, right? This week or this game. Create novelty, and then energy management plans to make sure you can sustain the effort over a long period of time. That was better.
That was good.
Yeah,
That was good.
that was 60 seconds.
Reaper.
Well, like nothing happens. There's not a trapdoor going to open up underneath you, or like you're not going to like get hooked off the side of the stage or anything like that.
It's my competitive nature, my challenge.
Maybe in season 3, when we get our studio built and we invite people in, Pete, we can have a trapdoor, and we can do
That is a
that.
good idea. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, that's pretty much all we've got time for on this episode. And it's been an absolute treat, to be honest. I would go so far as to call it a right Bobby Dazzler of an episode.
Ooh.
We talked.
I don't know what
Yeah,
that
I
means,
know.
but is it good?
It's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing. In fact, I want you to start using that phrase in Canada. Next time I come over to Canada, I want to hear people saying that things are a right Bobby Dazzler.
Right, Bobby Dazzler. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what? That would be a great sound clip if you could just go, Karen, the 80% Mental podcast is a right Bobby Dazzler.
Is this where we've got to? Is this what we've become?
Yeah. Yeah.
The 80% Mental podcast is a right Bobby Dazzler.
Perfect. That's amazing. Right, I've totally forgotten where I was up to because that's just distracted me so much.
You were saying thank you. It's been a right Bobby Dazzler. You're so awesome. No, stop.
Okay. I'm gonna get to that bit. So in this episode, we've talked to Dr. Karen. I can get your name right. In this episode, we've talked to Dr. Karen McNeil about the event versus the grind. And I just want to say a massive thank you to Karen for joining us today on 80% Mental. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's always good to reflect on your practice and what you're doing. And kudos to you guys. As I said earlier, as professionals in the field, having experts to listen to and get a glimpse into their process has been awesome. So the 80% Mental podcast has been a right Bobby Dazzler.
That's amazing. And unprompted as well. So we've discussed the event versus the grind. That was the premise that we started out with. And we've talked about the motivation of the grinding through that long season. And Karen talked to us about energy management, about focus, about managing the narrative and the need to change things up and to learn how to say the same thing in 100 different ways. We talked about the event and understanding that those things are different in terms of the scale and the size and perhaps the stress that's involved in them as well. And accepting that and preparing for the fact that it's not all going to be perfect. But from an athlete point of view and a psych point of view, perhaps the event and the grind aren't necessarily as different as maybe we first thought. I think one of the things that our listeners will really take from this episode is something that you said almost towards the end there, Karen, and that was about the drip feed, the slow drip of trying to make a change during that long season or during that sort of long period of time. And we have a natural tendency, I think, to want to make a difference. So for all of the young sports psychs who are listening, you want to be part of it. You want to make a difference. You want to show what you can do. But actually, as you said there, Karen, it's a perfect way to get yourself shut down. And what we need to be doing is slow drip. Make a small change or suggest something little, not do everything at once. I hope that you have all enjoyed listening to this episode. Don't forget to check out all of our other episodes at www.80percentmental.com. And please do subscribe wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. If you have enjoyed it, it would be lovely if you spread the word. Share this episode or any others on your social media. Tell your friends. Go stand on a street corner and shout about how much you love 80% Mental and how much of a right Bobby Dazzler it is. Maybe explain what 80% Mental it is, though, if you're standing on a street corner shouting. But direct people to the website or the Twitter handle at EPM Podcast. Anyway, that's all from us for this episode. It just remains for me to say one last time, thank you very much to Dr. Karen McNeil.
Pleasure to be here, you guys. Thanks so much.
I'll edit out that massive gap, don't worry. And thanks to Hugh Gilmore, as usual, by my side. Not really by my side because we still don't have a studio, but thank you, Hugh.
Well, thank you, Pete, for doing all the work you do and bringing it all together and editing out all those lovely mistakes and making it sound like a Bobby Dazzler.
What mistakes? I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. We won't see you. It's a podcast.